Namaste everyone here at BookTube. Welcome to my channel Hamsavahini Vajra Astra. I'm Ahona. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the July 2020 Jane Austen Challenge. Now this challenge has been hosted by Katie from Books and Things and by Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. In today's video, I'm going to take you through, or I'm going to discuss my journey so far with challenge number 3, challenge number 5, challenge number 6 and challenge number 7. So let's get started with challenge number 3. Now before I begin, I'd like to mention that I do have a habit of rambling, so I have penned down my thoughts in these few pages, which I'd be referring to frequently. Now, challenge number 3 was to read any non-fiction work about Jane Austen or her time. So the work which I've chosen was Jane Austen, A Life by Claire Tomlin. Now, in my opinion, this book is thoroughly engaging. It is fantastic. It is delightfully detailed and it's very well explained. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book, and I had started reading this book initially at the beginning of this month. However, I had to keep this book locked away so as to ensure that I start reading the other books of Jane Austen, which I had selected for the challenge, because I just could not put down this book because of the beautiful flow of events in this book. So I've just mentioned all my thoughts about this book and a little bit about the insights of this book. So I'll just share this with you in a few moments. Now, the flow of events described in this biography is a pulsating, living, breathing account of Jane's life and the events which surrounded her life, which contributed and gave birth to her wonderful novels, poems, short stories, which were penned down by Jane Austen later on. Now, 3 weeks ago, I had uploaded a video about the influences of her childhood since birth on Jane Austen's work. So continuing from there today, I'd like to share that Jane Austen's growing years into teenage and the environment which surrounded her growing years as well as from birth, which gave rise to her writing called Juvenilia. Now, from where we left, when Jane Austen was sent off to a small cottage for a period of short separation from her mother to toughen up as a newborn till she attained the age of reason, she was then returned to the parsonage. And now the parsonage had become a bustling, fresh, chaotic environment for her because of her 4 elder brothers and the boarding boys from school, which her parents ran for an extra income at the parsonage. So the number of pupils were small, yet they had almost become a part of the Austen family at the parsonage. Jane Austen had her elder sister Cassandra fulfilling the role of little mother at this young age, and Jane was introduced to a world of education, of morality, aspiration, intellectualism, boyish rashness, and pragmatic approach to any given situation, and different types of language, and much more. And all these factors largely contributed to the distinct independent style of writing which we see in Jane Austen's writings. Now, although her mother, Mrs. Austen, was a very busy woman handling work at the parsonage and watching over the boarding boys and their daily needs, yet she did manage to throw in a delightful prose here and there to cheer up the room, or maybe a homesick boarding boy. And it is this merry attitude which is largely portrayed in all the matriarchal role models we see in her novels. Some heartwarming, some amusing, some charming, some comforting, but mostly concerned about the good life and the good in life. Now, with little mother Cassandra, her elder sister, Jane Austen grew in an environment of boyish chuckle, frantic occasional giggles, boots clacking around the house everywhere, all day, learning, education, reading, refining Latin and Greek grammar. So as Jane grew around this lively, dynamic environment, her father George Austen's bookshelf were of primary importance. Now, George Austen had a huge library with excellent books, and these books fostered Jane's talents for writing since an early age. As Jane entered her teens, at 13, her cousin Philip, for the first time, gave a real description of Jane in a letter to her other cousin Eliza. She viewed Jane as whimsical and affected, and with more of a prim attitude than being prettily feminine in her outlook, mannerisms and character which demanded a charming nature and a pleasing countenance and graceful aesthetics in mannerisms and behavior, and of course the feminine charisma. Here a natural comparison was drawn by her cousin Philip between Jane and her elder sister Cassandra, and Cassandra being more feminine and sweet, and Jane being more like her elder brother Henry, speaking of which we arrive at the Austen siblings. Now, amongst the Austen siblings, James and Henry were the scholar. Edward was not cut out for classical studies, yet he had a very practical bent of mind, and Francis was a man of action. Jane, on the other hand, was a tough, unsentimental child who was drawn to rude anarchic imaginings and black jokes because of the environment which she was brought in, where there were boys who were bursting into manhood. She had her elder brothers, and she had the boarding school boys, and she had her elder sister Cassandra always navigating her like a little mother, and her busybody merry mother, and her father who always engaged her in reading more from his library and encouraged and supported Jane's writing from a very young age. Now, her cousin Phila could not get into the comprehension of strong, intellectual, integrative, quiet yet observant character which Jane was moulding into, and her personality made her cousin Phila quite uneasy. So Phila was more welcoming of a girl who had more charm and sweetness and feminine charisma, beautiful mannerisms, etc. Hence the sharp wit and humour of an almost pragmatic demeanour of Jane led her cousin Phila to critique Jane's countenance in the letter which she wrote to their cousin Eliza Hancock. Now, Jane never fell into the common expectations of girlhood. Although she was formally trained in the then arts a young lady should be accomplished in, like training in pianoforte by an organist from Winchester Cathedral, Jane's other abilities, as opposed to the abilities of the girls of her age, were to write stories and plays for amusement and entertainment purposes. Now, when her brother Francis left home to join the naval school, Jane started writing stories for Francis and other family members. A year after Francis left, Jane wrote Alice and Jack's story in the most amusing and entertaining way, with the heart of the story revolving around the effects of drinking and intoxication of a lady, and it thoroughly entertained Francis. In the Christmas of 1788, when Jane turned 13 years, her brother Charles Henry and James, along with Jane, put up two plays, The Sultan and The High Life Below the Stairs, and these two plays were the last of the theatricals which were put together by the Austen siblings. In January of 1789, her brother James, who was also called the writer of the family, produced issue of his weekly magazine, The Loiterer. However, Jane tried to encourage this weekly magazine to pen down articles for women readers, which was unheard of in the Jane Austen and James started writing for their weekly newspaper, The Loiterer, and James, although James' viewpoint on any subject took a political turn, with a brash comic note, Jane Austen's comic tales were achieving fresh depths of creativity. Now, George Austen's continuous appreciation and support for his daughter Jane's writing boosted Jane's confidence into writing 3 notebooks of literary work, which were Leslie Castle, History, and History of England. Now, the writers whose literary work from her father's collections, which influenced Jane's writings, were Samuel Richardson Fielding, Shakespeare, Sterne, and there were moral writers who were Dr. Johnson and Cowper. Now, amongst the women novelists, her favourite were Charlotte Lennox, Charlotte Smith, Fanny Burney, and Hannah Colley, and many more. Now, the year 1790 to 1794 in Jane's life saw 3 marriages and 2 funerals. The 3 weddings were as follows. In December 1791, her brother Edward married Elizabeth Bridges, a baronet, and her work, The Three Sisters, distinctly a mercenary story of brutal matchmaking, was a wedding gift to the newlyweds. In March 1792, her brother James married Anne Matthew, who was the daughter of a general and the granddaughter of a duke, and her then close acquaintance Martha and Mary had to shift out of the parsonage to settle elsewhere. And as a parting gift, there were short poems written by Jane and given to Martha as a gift, and the short story of Evelyn, which was gifted to Mary. In December 1792, her close friend Jane Cooper got engaged to a naval officer, Captain William, and it is here that her now married cousin Eliza shared her mother's plight. So that was Jane Austen's aunt, Philadelphia, when she had to go all alone to India in search of her husband. So Jane was quite taken aback, and she was astonished by the hardship her aunt Philadelphia had to go through to get and set up a good life for herself, and hence she coined this entire story in the plot of her work Catherine or the Bower in the summer of 1792. Now the two funerals during this period of time between 1790 and 1794 which Jane saw in her life were her aunt, Mrs. Philadelphia Hancock, at the end of February 1792 in Hampstead due to poor or ill health, and her cousin Eliza's French husband, Jean Capote de Feuillade, on 22nd February 1794. This ended her cousin Eliza's 12 years of marriage, and in 1794, Jane wrote her famous work Lady Susan, which was the base of a French novel. It was actually inspired by a French novel, which was Laclau's novel Les Liaisons, which was introduced to Jane by Eliza herself during the previous visit to Steventon before the French Revolution had begun, and it had hints of observing Eliza herself. Now this visit by her cousin Eliza had been made previously in 1790 at Steventon, and Jane's work Love and Friendship were a gift, and it was dedicated to her cousin Eliza. Now by the end of it all, Juvenilia is the collection of these short stories which she had been gifting to her friends and her family during her growing years. Now, to know more about Juvenilia, I would recommend Katie's recent video from Books and Things, where she has mentioned a lot about Juvenilia, because Juvenilia is one of Katie's favorite works, as it is of most of the Jane Austen lovers. So I have linked a description in the description box. I've shared a link to her video, so please do check her video in case if you would like to know more about Juvenilia. So this is my journey so far with challenge number 3. Now I will be back with challenge number 5, challenge number 6 and challenge number 7, which I'm attempting to put all together in one video. So I'll be back with challenge number 5. Namaste everyone here at Book. Namaste everyone here again. I am back with challenge number 5 of the July 2020 Jane Austen challenge. Now in challenge number 5 we had to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. So for this challenge, the book that I have chosen, Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Now, as you can see, it's not a very slim book, and I'm just halfway through the novel, and I'm still trying to gallop towards the end of the novel, but I don't really want to because it's a beautiful novel. I may not be able to finish this by the end of this week, but I plan to continue reading it till I finish it. So I'll just get down with my opinions on this particular book as what I had read so far. Now, Ivanhoe, as we know, is a historical romance novel which is set during a time period of England which was quite tumultuous. So there were Saxons and there were Normans who had a power struggle, and this novel is set during that time. Now, in my opinion, the language of this book is very picturesque, it is very detailed, and it helps the reader to visualize the story aptly. And also the Middle Ages of England, the wars and the chivalrous nature and the war culture all springs up vividly in the mind's eye as we progress through the novel. So as I was reading through this novel, I could see the excitement, the adventure, and the class divide, and the cultural aristocracy, the practical wisdom, the heroism, and of course the romance, which is all there, all packed up in this novel. Now, there's also a lot of historical action, because what we learn is that this novel was set in the time of the Third Crusade, when King Richard returns to reclaim his kingdom from his brother John, who had usurped most of Richard's power during his long absence in the Holy Land. So in this particular novel, there are three parts of this adventure. Now, if I get into the details of the three parts, this video is going to be never ending, so I'm not going to get into those three parts. However, I would recommend this novel for anyone who looks for adventure, and for anyone who loves a vivid description of the chivalrous nature of the Saxons and the aristocratic virtues of the Norman roots. Now, it's inevitably beautifully written, and if Jane Austen herself were quite divided in her opinion about Sir Walter Scott, and whose works, such as this particular novel, did triumph apart from his poetry, because Jane Austen was not very happy that Sir Walter Scott was writing such excellent novels and his poetry was also reaching heights of excellence. So all of this did stir up some competition amongst the then popular writers. So I would definitely agree if Jane Austen was a bit jealous of Sir Walter Scott, because frankly speaking, this novel is really vivid. This is the first time I'm reading about Sir Walter Scott. I might have read some poems about which were written by Sir Walter Scott when I was at school, but this is the first time that I'm reading a real novel by Sir Walter Scott, and it is just amazing. I'm really loving it, and although I may not be able to finish it in time for this challenge, but yes, I will continue reading it. So this is my short little summary for challenge number 5. I'll be back with challenge number 6 and challenge number 7. And now, before I conclude this part of the video, I would like to add that in the previous part of this video, in which I had explained about challenge number 3, I did forget to add the name of Rita J. Dashwood. Now, for anybody who loves reading biographies, especially Jane Austen biographies, I would highly recommend, please check the channel of Rita J. Dashwood, who holds a PhD in Jane Austen studies. I have added a link in the description box below for you to just click on and check this channel, which has amazing content. And if you are new to the Jane Austen world, you should definitely check her channel out. And with this, I would conclude this part of the video. I will get back with challenge number 6 and challenge number 7. Namaste. Namaste everyone again. I'm back with challenge number 6 and challenge number 7 of the July 2020 Jane Austen challenge. Now, both these challenges were watching challenges, so I could not help but jot down some of my opinions and thoughts after watching challenge number 7. So I'll just get started first with challenge number 6. Now, challenge number 6 was to watch any direct adaptation of any Jane Austen novel or book. So I chose to watch Sense and Sensibility. It's a very old I would say, direction. It was directed by Ang Lee, and it was released on 13th of December 1995. We have Alan Rickman, Emma Thompson, Kate Winslet, and Hugh Grant. Now, as you see here, Emma Thompson plays the role of Eleanor, who's the main protagonist. She's Eleanor Dashwood of the novel. And we have Kate Winslet, who plays Marianne Dashwood, and we have Hugh Grant, who plays Edward, as well as Alan Rickman, whose performance I loved. He plays Colonel Brandon. So I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I would not give any spoilers, so I would recommend you can get back, although there are modern adaptations to Sense and Sensibility now, which are out. However, this is one adaptation which I really liked. It had won the 1995, it had won 7 1995 Academy Award nominations, including the Best Picture and the winner Best Screen by Emma Thompson. So this was for challenge number 6. Now, challenge number 7. Now, challenge number 7 was to watch a modern screen adaptation of any Jane Austen book. So I watched Lost in Austen. Now, I'm just going to talk about Lost in Austen, which is a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice with an element of time travel which is happening between parallel worlds. Now, the twist of this plot takes us through a time travel journey of parallel worlds which are separated by a time frame of 200 years. Amanda Price, who is the protagonist in this story, and is from today's London, which is modern London, and she is from the future, so which is today, and she lands into her favorite heroine, Elizabeth Bennet's world, through a time travel outlet. Now, Amanda, being from the future, knows the correct sequence of events. However, at present, things go in a disarray, and the plots which work out turns everyone's lives upside down. So it is now up to the determined Amanda to put everyone's life together, and as is illustrated in her favorite Jane Austen's novel. Now, in my opinion, this is a delightful mess of events, and it was absolutely hilarious watching it. The adaptation takes a fun look of the life back in the Regency era England and the life in today's London as well. Now, the twist in the understanding of the characters of Bingley and Wickham was fascinating and refreshing, and I loved this part the most, especially about Wickham. Now, also the shocking experience of Mr. Darcy as he time travels to modern day London today, and that was really amusing. However, I would have loved if the director could have added a few more elements so that we could have seen more shock on Darcy's face, trying to grasp on the reality in London. So overall, it was refreshing, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching it, and it was given, and the viewpoint of the entire novel of Pride and Prejudice was given in an entirely different viewpoint, and I loved the script and I loved the acting. However, there were some disappointments. For example, Mr. Darcy's visit to, or Mr. Darcy's time travel could have been more elaborate, but overall it was thoroughly enjoyable and I loved it. So this was about Pride and Prejudice, retelling, or a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. Speaking of which, now there is a read-along which is going on from the 15th to the 30th of Pride and Prejudice. So what I did was, I did find this particular amazing graphic novel of Pride and Prejudice stating, "Are you immune to the Darcy appeal?" And I understand that those who love books and those who love classics, this is probably not the exact taste, but because I love the graphic novels and the illustrations, there is no compromise on the dialogue. It's absolutely the same, and all these illustrations are inspired by the BBC directed Pride and Prejudice. So it was quite a read, and I really thoroughly enjoyed reading through this book. I could not read this book in one take because it's quite long, so I had to do it in parts. But for anybody who wants to grab a copy of Pride and Prejudice in a graphic novel, I would recommend this particular graphic novel. So it's actually wonderful, and I loved all the illustrations here, as you could see. So this completes my summary of challenge number 3, challenge number 5, challenge number 6, and challenge number 7. I'll be back with another Jane Austen challenge very soon, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a good reading week ahead, and namaste.